Somebody was persuasive. AIPAC is very persuasive. For instance, the Israeli lobby in Congress. Well, I'll concede this. It was a good week for the neocons in the military-industrial complex who want war all the time.
So recently, Thomas Massie went on Face the Nation to talk about the debacle that is U.S. intervention in Iran after the bombing strikes took place last night there, and what he's doing to try to stop it. I can't wait to hear from him. He's the best man in Congress by far, if you ask me. So let's watch, let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I'll start with you, Congressman Massie. You know, I know this is an unlikely pairing. You are on completely different ends of the political spectrum, but you both worked on this war powers resolution to prohibit U.S. forces from engaging in hostilities against Iran without authorization from Congress. The president just blew right past that.
Well, you know, I think I represent part of the coalition that elected President Trump. We were tired of endless wars in the Middle East and tired of wars in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And we were promised that we would put our veterans, our immigration policies, and our infrastructure first. And so what Roe and I did, we did this last week when, you know, they were rattling the sabers because we saw this coming. We put forward this war powers resolution. I've teamed up with Khanna before on this, to his credit. When Joe Biden was president, we tried to rein in the executive and reassert Congress's authority, sole authority, to declare war and to engage or authorize the engagement of acts of war.
Yeah, this is great. This is a great political alliance. He's totally right about so many Americans dreading the prospect of new wars, especially new regime change wars. You know, we kind of had enough of those regarding Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya and Syria and all the fallout that came from them. And he's totally right about the constitutionality behind this. Presidents of all political stripes during my lifetime have blatantly violated what the Constitution says about the declaratory power, which is that only Congress has the power to declare war. But regardless of political party or political outcome, all presidents have essentially violated it. That in my life, the oppositional party usually opposes it when it happens, and then they seem to support it when it doesn't. But Thomas Massie and Khanna are two of the only ones that have been consistent about this. So it's good to see that they're trying to stop this.
Something we talked to other lawmakers about as well in the Senate. I know there's efforts to support you, but the Speaker of the House, who is from your own party, has really rejected this. He says the Article 1 power of Congress really allows for the president to do this. It was a limited, necessary, targeted strike, he says.
Well, he's probably referring to the War Powers Act of 1973, but that's been misinterpreted. There was no imminent threat to the United States, which was what would authorize that. And I think that's peculiar to hear that from the Speaker of the House. Look, Congress was on vacation last week when all this was happening.
You haven't been briefed on any of the details.
We haven't been briefed. They should have called us all back. And frankly, we should have debated this war powers resolution that Khanna and I offered instead of staying on vacation and doing fundraisers and saying, oh, well, the president's got this under control. We're going to cede our constitutional authority.
Yeah, he's totally right about that. And what's so ironic about this is you had many of these MAGA Republicans actually blasted Biden for initiating targeted strikes against Yemen and Iran during his last term. He actually struck Iran, I think, within 6 months of the end of his term. And they used this same language, like you have to allow Congress to declare war. Of course, now that the tables have turned, Trump has acquired power, you either hear silence or them trying to justify this by, you know, backing themselves into the same corner that Democrats used to justify this before. Look, this always happens. It's so depressing. And he's right about the War Powers Act. Not only has it been interpreted dubiously to expand the power of the executive throughout my lifetime and allow for more of these unilateral strikes, which the founders certainly didn't envision, I will also say that the War Powers Act itself is constitutionally dubious because in Article 6 of the Constitution, there's something called a supremacy clause. It says, this Constitution and all laws made in pursuance thereof, referring to the Constitution, shall be the supreme law of the land. That implies, and this is how the founders described it in the ratification conventions, including Luther Martin, who actually originated this clause, this was a limiting force. This meant that not just any law was constitutional, it had to conform with the Constitution. and the Constitution gives Congress the sole power of declaring war. So this has been perverted, whether or not you think the War Powers Act is unconstitutional, but I personally do, and even if you don't, it's certainly been violated and stretched to the maximum degree to justify this lunacy that we don't need to see anymore.
Congressman Khanna, and we didn't hear from the Secretary the explanation as to why now. We haven't heard that from anyone, other than a reference to the president had a roughly 60-day timeline on diplomatic talks. But we also know we had more talks scheduled when Israel launched this attack. So it's not exactly clear the emergency. You will be briefed along with other members of Congress Tuesday. What are the questions you have?
Well, first of all, the tragedy in this country is that we keep entering these overseas wars. We triumphantly declare the mission is accomplished the day after, and then we're left with Americans bearing the consequences for decades. Now, Thomas is absolutely right in showing courage. I mean, the headlines all across this country says the United States enters war with Iran. He is actually representing a lot of the people in the MAGA base, people like Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Theo Von, who has had them on, who's saying, we don't want this war. And I heard your interview with Secretary Rubio. He's saying, well, we want a peace deal. We want to make sure that Iran can enrich uranium through civil purposes. Well, we had that. We had that at the JCPOA, and there was not a single violation that the IAEA found during that time. So my question, I guess, is now you're going to force Iran to go covertly in developing this nuclear material. Now you've put American troops at risk. Now you're wasting billions of our dollars because we're sending more troops to the Middle East. What did you accomplish, and why are you oblivious to the American people who are sick of these wars?
Yeah, well said there. He's totally right on this, and he's right about that. The 2003 playbook is being reinstated here because of all the mission accomplished stuff. You saw that in Trump's speech last night. It was like 4 minutes or so, where, you know, he just couldn't stop boasting about how successful of an operation this was. And then today, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense's press conference, if you could call it that, was a love fest toward Donald Trump. You know, I'm surprised they didn't do it under a mission accomplished banner. They're bringing out all the stops to recreate 2003 here now. They're warning about sleeper cells in the U.S. that are Iranian sleeper cells. Just crazy nonsense. And he's right about the JCPOA. It was successful in eliminating tensions, or at least making them far less than they are now, between Iran and the United States. Only great thing in terms of foreign policy that Obama ever did, if you ask me. Khanna is great on this issue. I love to see it. He's not consistently anti-war. He's a big supporter of the Ukraine war, has constantly voted for funding, but I'm willing to leave that to the side for the purposes of this. This is here and now. It's the most important thing to stop as far as it can be stopped at this point, even though the U.S. is already in deep. And it's great to see him aligning with, I think, the most anti-war voice in Congress, Thomas Massie.
But Congressman, are you open to the idea that there could be intelligence that is disclosed to you in this classified setting on Tuesday that could justify this? Or is any military action, in your view, war?
Well, I'm always open to new intelligence, but the procedure should have been that Congress was briefed before we decided to enter war, and that we actually had a vote on it. You have Tulsi Gabbard, who just months ago, the director of intelligence, saying that was not the case. The reality is, and we should just speak openly, there are people who want regime change in Iran, and they are egging this president on to bomb. I hope cooler heads will prevail. We need to pass Thomas Massie and my War Powers resolution to make it clear that we're not going to get further entrenched into the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with what he said there. You know, you should always be interested in seeing new intelligence. Of course, we know that U.S. intelligence and the CIA has drummed up false intelligence to support wars that happened in Iraq, famously the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, coming after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was a false flag attack, kind of orchestrated by the CIA. The CIA falsifies information all the time, but if that investigation and if that intelligence was so compelling, You could get congressmen to vote on a war powers resolution, or I'm sorry, a declaration of war, which, by the way, hasn't happened since World War II in the United States. Congress has just deferred their responsibility over this subject to the president generally, and it's been catastrophic. It's encouraged war, and it's encouraged the executive to grow into a quasi-emperor with more power than even an English monarch of, say, the 17th century, where an English monarch could unilaterally declare war, but then Congress, it would be up to Congress to fund it. Now you have executives that just make those decisions on the fly. This is crazy, and I'm very glad to see this alliance between Khanna and Massie on this issue. I'm not sure that it can be successful. Too much of Trump's base is very much in support of this. Some are not, though, and a lot of Democrats are not. So it's going to be really interesting. The Democrats, when out of power, are always better on war than they are in power. The same is true with the Republicans, but the Democratic establishment has been overtaken by the military-industrial complex. So we'll have to see what happens here. AIPAC is going to be on full lobbying duty over this. Let's see.
And Congressman Massie, it's interesting because you were talking about a part of the party you represent. The Secretary of State comes from a different part of that same party, as you know. And I did hone in on the question about intelligence and what it showed. He called it an ambition to weaponize. Weaponization ambition. That's different than they're making a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
But are you open to intelligence and persuasion here?
I'm open as well. But look, in the first Iraq War, the second Iraq War, and the war in Afghanistan, Congress first got the briefings. Congress met and debated. It should have been declarations of war, but at least they did an authorization of use of military force. We haven't had that. This has been turned upside down, this process.
Well,
yeah, totally right. They just skip all the process in pursuit of these wars. Trump did it, Biden did it, Obama did it, Bush did it to some degree. He's right about the AUMF, the famous one in Iraq, which wasn't a war declaration, but you did have almost all of Congress, except for Barbara Lee, sign on to the Afghanistan one. And the Iraq one was a little bit more controversial, but still overwhelming support from Congress in favor of that. He's totally right. They flip this on the head. They just allow the president to make all these consequential decisions on our foreign policy, stretching into aggressive wars where the U.S. hasn't been hit at all. It's just crazy. We need to stop it, and I'm so glad that there are some men in Washington willing to stop it and just call it out for what it is. That, more than anything, has its own power. Even if these guys fail, to get this information out there and to, sow the seeds of liberty and the cause of non-intervention is a great thing.
You heard from Mitch McConnell, the former Republican leader, the senator, say it was a bad week for the isolationists. He was talking about Tucker Carlson and he was talking about Steve Bannon. Do you think that the president is making a choice here, or is he trying to have it both ways? Both saying, I'm going to please the hawks of the party by bombing, but then I'm going to say I want a peace deal and make the isolationists happy by saying, I'm not committing to anything more than one and done.
Well, I'll concede this. It was a good week for the neocons in the military-industrial complex who want war all the time. I wouldn't call my side of the MAGA base isolationists. We are exhausted. We are tired from all of these wars, and we're non-interventionists. I mean, this was one of the promises. I mean, are you going to call President Trump's campaign an isolationist campaign? What he promised us was we would put America first. And I think there are still voices in this administration. You've still got J.D. Vance. You've still got Tulsi Gabbard. You still RFK Jr. You still got calmer heads that could prevail.
They were not.
Yeah, so on that, as far as isolationism, he's not an isolationist. If he was, he wouldn't want free trade, which he does, and he wouldn't want diplomacy with other countries rather than war, which he does. An isolationist would mean locking out your country to all relations with other countries. It's just a pejorative that's used toward non-interventionists. Ron Paul got this critique too, but Ron Paul was the most open about wanting to trade and negotiate with other powers. He just didn't want war. It's about war, and Massie's totally right here. It's interesting to see how this will affect the Trump base. This coalition is not totally aligned on foreign policy. He mentioned a few of them, Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon, but also Marjorie Taylor Greene and some others have risen to oppose this quite profusely, Rand Paul as well. I'm not so sure about Tulsi Gabbard. She said 6 weeks ago in her annual threat summary that Iran didn't have a nuclear weapon, and Iran, there was no evidence, restarted their nuclear weapon program since 2003. And then 2 days ago, one day before the actual U.S. bombing campaign against Iran, she said they're within weeks of getting a bomb. Something changed. It seems like she might be compromised to me. You know, I'll never say that she's the greatest hawk in that administration, but she has been prone to supporting Israel, just like almost everyone else in this administration has been, and it seems like she might have been won over by the Israeli lobby, Netanyahu, but something in the narrative changed. I think it was war propaganda, nothing more, nothing less, and that's what we're seeing play out now as the war propaganda campaign continues.
Persuasive in this case, clearly.
Well, somebody was persuasive. AIPAC is very persuasive. For instance, the Israeli lobby in Congress. If you look at my colleagues' feeds now, they all look the same. They're all tweeting the same message that we've got to support Israel and we've got to do this. My question is, does 3 bombings and we're done with Iran's nuclear ambitions? Is that the 2 weeks to slow the spread of 2025? Is this, we were told 2 weeks to slow the spread then, now we're told it's just going to take 3 bombings. But what happens when Israel gets bombed again?
Yeah, it's an apt analogy. We heard that, this mitigation process would be so simple for us to take on. 2 weeks to slow the spread, and then you'll be back to your daily life. That got stretched out in many states for more than 2 years. We had religious worship restrictions, assembly rights violations, 6-foot rules, business closures. You couldn't see your dying grandparents in the hospital because of these absurd regulations. They always stretch their powers to maximum degree, such is also true in war. And that could be what we're seeing now. My biggest fear is that U.S. troops in the region now get struck, guaranteeing probably boots on the ground in a total war, a regime change war on behalf of Netanyahu. And you know what the crazy thing is? That would be just as Netanyahu wants it. So I am praying for their safety right now. U.S. troops in the region are in a vulnerable position, and they are sitting ducks right now when it comes to getting hit by Iran because of this foolhardy strategy based on the U.S.
Is Trump going to sit by and say, no, we're not going to further engage in this war?
I tried to get answers from the secretary on that question. But when you say the pro-Israel lobby, AIPAC, do you see a difference between Israel's interests and American interests?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Iran, the reality is they don't have a missile that can reach the United States. They're not near to getting a missile that can reach the United States. I think this, what has happened, what has transpired this week has been planned for months. This administration and maybe even the administration prior to that said, you go in and soften them up, take out their air defense capabilities, and then we'll send in the big bombers.
So,
yeah, hard to deny, especially because this has been in the news for months. Actually, like 2 months ago, there was that New York Times article that came out that said that essentially Trump had squashed a potential war with Iran. This was being debated within the administration for a long time, and it had been debated within foreign policy circles for a long time. We know from the clean break memo that the U.S. planned a regime change operation in Iran as early as 1996. We know that because Wesley Clark went into the Pentagon and saw that classified memo. It was one of 7 countries that the U.S. was planning to overthrow. It was the last one. Guess which one is the only one not to be overthrown so far? It's Iran, and it's playing out right now. It's brazen to continue following that strategy after it was exposed, but they're still doing it. So, yeah, Thomas Massie's exactly right. This has been planned for quite a long time, and Trump seems to have been complicit with it, and he seems to have admitted that to some extent last night in his speech. He said that I've been working with Netanyahu on this plan. So it seems like they lulled Iran into negotiations that were, at least at some point along the way, a farce, scrapping it and bombing it. So we'll have to see what happens next. I really am praying that our troops don't get injured in the region or hurt or killed. There's 45,000 of them, and it doesn't provoke a more total war where there's going to be boots on the ground, an Afghan or Iraq-style occupation. It would just be horrendous and disastrous.
Congressman Khanna, I know you have raised objections on this program in the past about Israel's operations in Gaza for how it has conducted that war against Hamas. that was a different context. But now you very well may be asked to provide more weaponry to Israel to defend itself. Do you oppose that as well?
Well, first, let me just say that it's a totally unfair smear to call people isolationists, the vast majority of Americans who don't want more war and want diplomacy. Diplomacy and engagement is not isolationism.
Right on.
But look, on Israel, I have supported aid and support defensively. And even the War Powers Resolution says that if Iran is striking Israel, we could provide defense so that Israel isn't hit. What I opposed was giving Israel offensive weapons to go kill more people in Gaza. I think that war needs to end. But I think the bottom line, Margaret, is what have we achieved here? We're going to push Iran to now be like Pakistan or North Korea, go in and try to develop a nuclear bomb covertly. We have put more American troops at risk. We're going to spend more resources going and getting more entrenched in the Middle East. And we've created a generation of hate. It's like, can this country learn? We keep voting for people for president who say we're not going to get into war, and then they keep getting pushed by the Washington Beltway to get us into this mess.
Oh, that is so true. I'm so glad to hear him say that. This is probably the best interview I've ever seen of Khanna, and he's always been pretty good on some of the theaters of war, not Ukrainian, but in this one, he's great. He's right. Republicans also always campaign like they're Ron Paul, and then they get into office and they govern like John McCain. That's a quote from my friend Clint Russell, Liberty Lockdown, if you know who that is. But I think it's so true. There's so much truth to that it's totally undeniable. And Khanna doesn't go as far as I would in terms of aid to Israel. I would cut the cord on that completely. I'm not here to subsidize the defense of foreign nations. U.S. taxpayers shouldn't bear that burden and that responsibility, and it's never good. We just inherit all of Israel's enemies. And Thomas Massie understands that. He's a little bit better on Israel aid. He doesn't vote for it. So this is a great collaboration. I hope it at least makes some waves in the Beltway. It's not likely to be successful, maybe, because Trump has such a stranglehold over Congress and his base where, you know, the few outliers like maybe Rand Paul and Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene and perhaps a handful of others are going to get vastly outnumbered by the others. And if they can get some Democrats to go in favor of this, which AIPAC controls a lot of Democrats too, I don't think that this is going to succeed, but I love to see them try. I love to see them pour earnest passion into stopping this war from expanding far beyond what it already is, which is already too deep. We're already too sucked in, and it's not just Netanyahu, it's Trump too, and there seems to be a complicity between the two men in planning and organizing this for a long time. It's a true shame, especially when Trump campaigned against starting new wars, and that was one of the selling points that his supporters used to sell his campaign, is that he didn't get us into a new war. Well, he certainly has now. And we'll have to see how it plays out. But I'm praying for our troops, praying for no false flag attacks, nothing that would draw them in, or Iranian strikes, because both are possible at this time. So I do want to hear from you what you guys say, though. What do you think about Massie and Khanna's plan? Let me know down below. Do you think there's any hope that the U.S. can stop from being sucked into a total war? I'd love to hear that, too. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. And please consider becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon patron. That would help support the channel immensely, and I'd appreciate it. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.